I wouldn't consider myself to be an expert video editor, and editing is definitely not my favourite part of the filmmaking process. Yet, for some reason, I edit most of my own projects. So, what's going on there? I believe that it's hard to find a good editor. But I want to question that and find out, is that true, or is that just something I tell myself? I can think of at least 5 good reasons for working with an editor, and yet I don't. So what is going on there? I thought I'm a fairly rational, sensible, logical person. I really want to understand what's going on here. So I looked into different types of bias, and you've got really famous one, the Dunning-Kruger effect, which says that I'm probably overestimating my ability as an editor compared to other editors. I remember years ago I worked with an editor who had probably been editing professionally since long before I had edited anything. And yet, at the age of 19 or whatever, I had the confidence to not just give them feedback, I think I overstepped the kind of boundaries and basically took over a little bit. Even though I was very, very new to filmmaking and editing. Looking back, I'm pretty sure the Dunning-Kruger effect was at least partially responsible for my confidence in my opinions, and I wonder if that still makes me less likely to work with editors today. There's the self-serving bias, where people are more likely to take responsibility for their own successes than their failures, so it's totally possible that I could have completely ignored the fact that I didn't brief an editor very well, or I didn't give very clear feedback, and then I didn't notice my own responsibility in why that collaboration didn't work well. I remember one time I hired someone to edit, and I gave them a kind of loose guidelines of what I was looking for, but I really encouraged them to use their creativity and to kind of, put their own fingerprint on it. But then I kind of retracted that after I saw what they'd made, and I said, can you send me the project files? And I actually took over because I felt like it was so far from what I wanted that it would be too much effort to try and give all the feedback to change it. And I was just like, can I take over? I felt kind of guilty giving someone creative freedom and then retracting it. And that's not the kind of collaborative environment I want to foster. There's also the IKEA effect, where people tend to put more value on things that they built or contributed to. So in my case, if I've filmed something, I'm more likely to be precious about that footage. And then add to that the sunk cost fallacy, where the more time and effort and maybe money that I've put into getting some footage, the harder it would be for me to leave it behind in an edit and not use it in the project. Now, of course, the hope is that when you hire an editor that wasn't there on set, they won't have the same kind of strange attachments to particular bits of footage based on what happened on set. But of course, if I'm giving feedback to the editor, I might think that they are a worse editor than they are, because I'm like, this editor is leaving all the best shots out. What if I decided that I didn't like working with a particular editor because they left out the shots that I favoured irrationally? And the weirdest thing is that any of these biases could also have a snowball effect in terms of the big old confirmation bias, where we tend to look for things that confirm our theory. So I think I've had this belief for a good number of years that it's hard to find editors, and so I'm more likely to notice evidence that supports my belief while discounting anything that says actually there are plenty of good editors out there. So I'm going to get out of my comfort zone and work with an editor, even though I have some rational and probably irrational reasons to believe that this could go wrong. So here is the project that I've been working on. It's a mini documentary that centers around 2 interviews, and I've already started editing to kind of build out the structure, but I've been really hesitant to add B-roll. I can already feel that I'm attached to certain shots, which makes sense since I literally learned to paddleboard and I built a whole custom rig so I could get some of the footage. So basically I've sunk a lot of time into these shots, whereas a good editor would be able to cut it all out if they thought that was best for the story. I'm not sure I can do that. So I'm enlisting some help from an outsider's perspective. Now this video is sponsored by Dropbox. I've been a paying customer for years before this, but today I'm partnering with them to show you my process for collaborating with an editor remotely. So the first thing I did was just put all the files into my Dropbox folder, and once they were uploaded onto the cloud, I could then grab a link that I can share these files with anyone internationally. So last week I sent the link to the editor and we had a call to chat about the project, and they've just sent me through the first draft of the edit that I can review via Dropbox Replay. So I've already watched it through once and I have some thoughts. Now, for far too long, I used to try and give feedback in these long emails where I'd have to type out the timestamps and basically use words to try and describe which part of the frame I was referring to. But here it is much faster. I can add comments at specific moments and even draw on the frame so that my feedback is really clear. Now, the next thing that jumped out at me is that I really wouldn't have chosen this shot. But rather than asking the editor to delete it, I'm trying to focus on what's actually happening inside the shot, which is more important than me trying to prove that I can hold a camera steady. To be honest, I'm a bit annoyed that I didn't do a better job filming this moment. But if I stop and think about why the editor chose this, I can see that it actually serves a purpose for the story. So I'm going to ask to try stabilizing the shot for the next draft, and hopefully I'll feel okay about keeping it in. Okay, so I've added some more comments, including some positive feedback, because it's all too easy to forget about that. But the biggest and possibly most concerning thing I noticed was that the editor chose not to use very much of the paddleboarding yoga footage. Now, I know that the sunk cost fallacy might be working against me here, but my whole initial idea for this doc was to have Bethany, who's scared of the open water, try something that she's never done before, yoga at sea. But this edit only features one shot from the yoga footage, and it's only for a second, which is a lot less than I was expecting. But on the other hand, I know I'm biased about this footage, and maybe more importantly, when I was editing the interview, I actually ended up cutting out all of the parts where she spoke about yoga, because it just felt stronger that way. So it's possible that the B-roll should follow that rather than hanging on to what I originally kind of hoped and expected this story to be. Okay, so it's been a minute and I've watched it through again, and I think I am going to ask to see a version with a bit more yoga footage, but I'm purposefully keeping my feedback a bit open-ended because I really don't want to micromanage about saying, oh, can you add more of the yoga shots or just extend this one? I'm leaving it completely up to the editor. So that's it, all my feedback is added and I can just eagerly await the next draft. Alright, it's been a few days and I've received back the latest version of the edit. I actually phoned up the editor so we could talk about it in real time, and we had a live review session, which meant the editor could literally see which part I was watching and exactly where my mouse was. I'm going to take us back to the very first shot though. It's so nice to be able to go back and forth in real time and know that we are on exactly the same page. Now, I can't show you too much of this edit because I don't want spoilers before it's released, but I will say that I'm really happy with it. And in case you were wondering, we were able to keep this shot in because the stabilization really helped a lot. So I'm glad I didn't rush to ask the editor to remove it. I'm so glad I got a second pair of eyes on the footage. I feel like my biases have been challenged and I've definitely got some fresh ideas that I would have never thought of. At a couple points throughout this project, things have got a little bit existential. For example, when I say a good editor, like what do I mean by good? Because like it's all very subjective and it depends which measuring stick you use. So it is weird thinking about this stuff, but I think I've got some clarity now. When I used to say that it's hard to find a good editor, I think I actually meant that I just don't want to take the risk of trusting an editor. It's a subtle difference, but it feels a lot more honest, where I'm taking my responsibility for my feelings about it and my decision, rather than just saying that it's universally difficult. I'm not saying it's easy to find a good editor either, but I've seen that it's definitely worthwhile. And so I'm going to nudge myself to collaborate more, even if it doesn't come naturally to me. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the sound mix on this project now. I'm really excited to see what it looks like with proper color grading, and thanks again to Dropbox for sponsoring this video. Feel free to click the link in the description to try Dropbox Replay as part of your Dropbox account. My name's Cade, this has been DSLRguide, and I'll see you next time.